You're listening to the RFP Success Show with 8-time author, speaker, and CEO of the RFP Success Company, Lisa Verhurick. Tune in each episode to learn what today's capture and RFP teams are doing to increase their win percentages by up to 20, 30, and even 50%, and meet the industry trailblazers that are getting it right. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am Lisa Verhurick, your host and founder and CEO of the RFP Success Company. And I am beyond excited to welcome our guest today. I want to welcome Steve Schramm. He is founder and managing director at Optimus. Optimus is an actuarial consulting firm focused on Medicaid and managed care, but I'm going to let Steve actually tell you more about that. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me. A little bit of background about Optimus. We're a strategy and actuarial consulting firm. As Lisa said, we specialize in the publicly sponsored health and welfare programs, so primarily Medicaid. We also do some non-traditional actuarial work for state and local government beyond Medicaid, state employees, municipalities, city employees, those kinds of things.
So this is really fun. Steve and I actually used to work together eons ago. He was my boss for many years. I have a very high level of respect for Steve, and he left that company and went and started his own business. And it's almost all state government, something to do with RFPs. So almost all of your business, right, has to come from RFPs unless it's relationship based.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we're going to just dive right in and talk a little bit about RFPs. And you've been doing RFPs for a long time. You actually have to do them now, as we just said. And in our time together, which for me was 11 years, I think for you it was 20 some years, it was all about RFPs. So tell us about your first introduction into RFPs way back in the early Mercer days.
So as Lisa said, we worked together at Mercer, and we were part of the government human services consulting practice. And as that consulting firm, we worked exclusively with state governments. So the only way we added new business was through the RFP process. And that was a rude awakening for me. It was literally my first job in the professional community. And I did not understand what the RFP process was, how to be successful. And so it was a trial by fire. And Lisa and I learned a lot of lessons together as we went through that process.
We really did. I remember one of my first RFPs, they came to me and said, do you know anything about RFPs? I was like, oh yeah, because back in my hotel days, we had like 2 or 3 page little RFPs that you had to answer that were like super simple. And I was like, I totally know RFPs. And then they came in and dropped this big state government 300-page RFP on my desk. And I was like, I might not really know what this is. So yeah, we cut our teeth big. And with that, of course, always comes lessons, right? And I know that we both have learned a lot of lessons, and I want to hear from you. What is 1 or 2 of the biggest lessons you've learned that you think you can share with the listeners to save them from some heartbreak?
I will tell you, first and foremost, find and replace is not a successful RFP strategy.
It is not. Why?
In our early days, what we did was we would literally go look on the shelf and see which RFPs had the most similarities, and then we would take that RFP, put it into Word, and we would replace state of North Carolina with state of New Jersey. And we didn't do any customization of our responses to the prospective client as part of the RFP. And that was a horrible strategy from the prospective client's perspective. All we were thinking about was, what's the most efficient and effective way we can submit a response? We weren't thinking of it from the client's perspective.
That's a really great point. One of the things that we talk about a lot is think about the human on the other side of that RFP. And we don't. We think about it almost exclusively from our perspective. What are we doing? What are we saying? What are we being? So that's amazing. And, back in those days was brutal because we didn't have the technology we have today, right? And I know that shelf you're talking about, they were in binders and we would go pull that binder off of the shelf. That's amazing. Do not find replace. It's a bad, bad thing. I love that. You all obviously for many, many years worked at Mercer and then now in your own firm you're doing RFPs. So in both of those instances, like what did you do to make sure that you were showing that you were the most competitive? And what have you learned along the way with regards to showing that you have a competitive advantage, that you are the one to hire?
So early on in my career, one of the roles that I played for state government was as an outside consultant to RFP evaluation committees. We would help them do evaluations, and we wouldn't do the evaluations ourselves, but we would help them tabulate the scores and make certain they were being consistent and adhering to their procurement process. And I will tell you, one thing that every one of the evaluation committees went through was first they would abstract the RFP response. Then they would compile the questions that they had. They would do their roundtables, and then they would do their scoring. And a consistent theme that came out of every one of those processes, and literally dozens upon dozens of evaluation committees, was what did I learn from this RFP response that is going to make me, as the evaluator representing the prospective client, be better at my job and more successful in completing the tasks associated with this RFP. If you cannot describe succinctly how the client benefits from this RFP response, you didn't score well. And so it was an eye-opener for me that from a competitive perspective, we as the respondent always write from our perspective. And honestly, that's not what the evaluation committee is interested in. They want to know from their perspective, from the client's perspective. That was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, it's so true. It is. I don't know that very many people think of it from that perspective. And it goes back to something you said a little while ago, that we think about it all from our own perspective. And we all care what's in it for us, right? We're reading it for what's in it for us. But let me ask you this, because a lot of people get these RFPs. There's these questions. I've got to answer the question. How much do I go rogue in answering that question and do something like that? Or do I just stay and answer the question? We get this question all the time, but I'm curious to see what your thought process on that is.
So my perspective on that is you can answer the question and do it in a way that you answer it from the client's perspective. So you are not going rogue if what you're doing is you're saying, I can help you. You've asked this question and I can help you. And here's how it's going to help you. Here's how you as a client will benefit from this. You can write it from their perspective and how they benefit, as opposed to all focused on you, and still answer their question and still be successful.
Such a great way to think about it. And it's hard though, right? When you're in the throes of that, how hard is that to do?
So I will tell you, it took us almost 12 months to pivot our writing style around from us focused to a prospective client focused, from an internal focus to an external focus. And we still, as part of our RFP process, we give examples particular to the RFP we're responding to, where we show this question, here's an answer that's from our perspective, but here's the answer from their perspective. And we give people examples so that they understand this is how you should be writing. This is the tone, the perspective, and how you're writing.
Yeah, it's so smart because, and again, what I said just a little while ago, right? This is a hard thing to do. It sounds simple, but it's not. And it takes a total mind shift. And I love that you do that, because especially when you start getting into some of the technical writers, right? Like here, actuary A, please learn to write this in a different way, and their brains don't work that way, right? And so kind of spoon feeding that to them, it sounds like that's what you guys do.
We do that, but it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of our collaboration with you, Lisa, and your team at RFP Success. So when we first started working with you, your first set of comments reviewing our initial draft was, this is not written for the prospective client. This is written for you. Think about how you change the perspective of your narrative and make it more for the client. How do you educate the evaluation committee? How do they see that value? And it took a long time for us to figure that out. And it required a lot of handholding by the RFP success team to get us to that point. It didn't just happen.
So I love that. Thank you for that little shameless plug. But also, you all made that decision, right? You made the decision, because I'll tell you right now, it's so much easier for me to look at your proposal and say, objectively, you're not focused on the client. And then I write my own proposal and it's crap. It's like, my mess is my message, right? What is going on and why are we not listening? So it is a lot easier for me to do it for you than it is for me to do it for myself. So it's hard.
It is key. You have to have an objective third party. We get so enamored with our writing and our approach and our communication styles that you need to have somebody from the outside. If all they do is say, hey, you take for granted that the evaluator, the committee, is going to understand what you just said. They may not have that technical expertise. Explain it more in plain English.
And the more technical you are, the more you've got to pull that back into simplicity, because there's probably one person on that eval committee that gets it and the rest of them don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we kind of talked about this already. You've just been giving us some examples of how you tailor. Is there anything else that you can give to our listeners around how they might be able to tailor, how you have really tailored your RFP responses to better meet the specific needs of that client instead of just dragging and dropping content from the prior proposal?
Sure. So I will tell you, one of the things that I said to Lisa when she established her company is, I think the name of your company is a little too narrow. You're not an RFP success company. You are a business development success company. The way you customize your RFP responses is you make certain that the RFP itself is just one step in a much larger business development process. And so one of the things that when we started working, Lisa, with you and your team, you asked us, what do we know about the prospective client? What are their issues? What are their needs? What are their questions? What resources do they have available? And for the first 6 months, we couldn't answer those questions effectively. We had not included the RFP as one of the steps in our larger business development process. And so what your team pointed out to us was a huge gap between business development and RFP responses. We needed to fold RFP responses up underneath as a step within our business development process. That's how you tailor your responses.
I could not love that more. If I could reach in and kiss you, I would, because I love that so much. It is so true. If you're bidding cold on an RFP and you know nothing about them, you can't tailor. And if you go in without any tailoring, you're just in a sea of other responders, and the evaluators are going to be doing their grocery list in their head. So that is so important. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here coming up, about kind of the relationship building side of things, because there is that component that's so important. So I love that you just said that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. We will be right back with Steve Schramm, Managing Director and Founder of Optimus.
You're listening to the RFP Success Show with Lisa Rahurik. If you're filling your scratch pad with takeaways from today's episode, let's talk. Gain an outside perspective about your RFP process and learn about how we're assisting clients with consistently high win rates. Book a call with us at the rfpsuccesscompany.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. We are talking to Steve Schramm, Founder and Managing Director of Optimus, and he has a very long and credible history with responding to RFPs. So he's given us some of his secrets and some of his lessons learned along the way. one of the questions that I really wanted to ask you, because I know we've had this conversation multiple times, is do you have different strategies when you're bidding on an incumbent contract, which you guys do a lot of, versus a brand new client?
Absolutely. You have to have different strategies. And here's why. If you think about ultimately, why does an evaluation committee choose you? It's because you have something that differentiates you from the rest of the competition. Your differentiators vary between whether you're the incumbent or whether you're a new bidder. So here's what we do. If we're bidding as the incumbent, we focus on identifying opportunities in our response that will improve our client's experience with us that the competition won't know about. Things that we know about their program, about their structure, and opportunities within that no one else will know.
Yes.
And that's the way we differentiate ourselves with an incumbent. For a new contractor, you have to take a completely different perspective. On a new contractor, what we think about is, what do we do that benefits the client that the current incumbent and the competitors don't do, that the client will look at and say, wow, that's something I want because it makes my life easier, better, more efficient, saves me money. Think of all the reasons why you choose a new vendor.
What if you
and
don't
that's what we try to do.
Yeah, so what if you don't have that? What if you don't feel like you have anything that is better than the current incumbent or the competitors?
Look, from our perspective, we will say, if we can't do it better, if we're not going to make it better for the client, why are we bidding?
Yes. Hallelujah.
At the end of the day, you should not bid on everything that comes past you. We were bidding on way too much before we started working with RFP Success. And now we bid on almost half as many things. But we have a much higher success rate because we're focused, we're targeted.
Yeah, it's so important. I also love what you said about the incumbent side of things. So many times what we see is people coming in and it sounds like they're a brand new, like it's just somebody they don't know. And that piece of showing them something that nobody else can give them. As the incumbent, you have so much more information than anybody else, and you better showcase that. Or frankly, and I think, Steve, you've experienced this before. I can't remember who was back at Mercer where the client basically said, we just didn't feel like you wanted it that bad. And you lost the contract.
Absolutely. We've received feedback around weak incumbent bids where they say it was cookie cutter and it did not show the effort that you valued our relationship. We're statutorily required to go out to bid. And so we don't have a choice. And what you showed us was you didn't really value us if you didn't put the time and effort in to write a really creative and innovative and responsive RFP.
Yeah, it's so true. You know, totally out of context, but not, is we're in the middle of interviewing companies for a particular service that we need within my company, and they're sending us proposals. And, you know, you kind of got to know that we know proposals, right? And the first company that I talked to, I loved them. They were fantastic. I was almost ready to just say, we're going to go with them. And guess what? We got their proposal and it was crap. It was literally dialed in. They pulled it off the shelf. They did not customize it at all. I didn't feel heard at all. They didn't hear anything that I had to say on that call that I spent with them. And it's the same thing, I think, especially when you're talking about an incumbency where they know us, they better be showing us, you know, that they know us and that they appreciate us. Otherwise, just to your point, just feels dialed in, right?
Exactly.
I want to shift gears just a little bit here because I know that you have in the past done a really great job of pulling partners in, which is a bit of a nightmare in the RFP process, right? Because you've got to figure out who that partner is going to be, then you've got to talk to them, then all this time is passing and you've got to get resumes and descriptions and all of that, and it's got to all look and say and feel and sound similar. So what are some of your successes that you found when it comes to partnering with somebody?
So the first thing I would say is think about how much business has shifted in the last 3 years, right? You shouldn't be intimidated by bringing partners in because you're no longer in the same office with half or more of your coworkers. So it's no different bringing in a partner because you're going to be doing video conferencing and remote exchange of information. So don't be intimidated by bringing partners in. It's how you're working with your everyday colleagues anyway. Second thing I will say to you is you have to have a project or an RFP charter. We call it our writing guide. And Lisa and team actually helped us build the structure of this writing guide. It guides how you work together effectively as a team. And it's got some really simple categories. First category is it says, how do you refer to each other and how do you refer to the client? So think about how many times in an RFP response you write the client, the prospective client's name, and your name. What if you have 4 partners and every one of them has 4 people writing? That's 16 people, and they all use a different way of referring to the client and to you as the team. Sometimes you're the RFP team. Sometimes you're the project team. Sometimes you're the collaborative team. Sometimes you're the optimist team. Think about how complex it would be to change all that after the fact. A writing guide is essential. First thing you got to do is have consistent references. Second thing in your writing guide, you have to have your win themes in there. You got to agree upon what are we going to write to that differentiates us from the client's perspective. That way, when an evaluation committee is reading your response, it has a theme associated with it. They can connect the dots and see how they benefit from selecting you. And honestly, the third major category is it has some do's and don'ts in this writing guide, right? Do this, respond positively, talk about how you've made clients be successful. Don'ts, don't overpromise, don't brag, don't talk down about partners or other entities. There are things that you have to agree upon. Then the fourth category, this kills me, but you really have to agree upon simple things. What's your font going to be? What's your spacing?
Yep.
What are your tables going to look like? What are your figures going to look like? Think about if you have a 300-page RFP response and you have 4 different partners with 4 different people writing, you can have 16 different styles for figures, tables, fonts, spacing, kerning, everything. Simple things. When do you use bold? When do you use underline? When do you use italics? You have to have a writing guide to successfully collaborate with other teams.
I 100% agree. And it saves you in the end, because what happens is, like, people will say, can't you just have the editorial person do it at the end? Well, yeah, but you've given the editorial person like 2.5 minutes to take a 300-page document, which, by the way, to editorial, peer, and format, it's about 5 to 7 minutes a page minimum. I can't do the math on that for a 300-page document, but yeah, with calculator, just calculate that out and realize that that editorial piece still has to be done, because it's not ever going to be right. But doing all of that as you go along is going to help the process. And when you do run out of time at the end, because we all do, then it's not going to be a complete hot mess. So great tips there. Great tips. All right. I'm going to shift gears again here. And full disclosure, as I've said at the beginning of this, Steve and I have worked together for a really long time. He has been a client for us. He's been my boss. We go way, way, way back. But I do want to talk a little bit about numbers, because I want to talk about where you were when you said, okay, I think it's time to bring in some outside help, but it's an investment to do that, right? Like, how did you know you were ready and wanting to do that and willing to invest money when you didn't have a guarantee that you were going to win that RFP?
Sure. So it was actually the calculus was pretty simple for us. We were bidding too much and we were winning too few. And if you think about what does it mean to be bidding too much? We started out as a small firm. There were originally 4 of us on day one, and we have since grown to about 30, 35 individuals. But even still, it is hard to do your day job and respond to RFPs. We realized how much time and effort we were investing in RFPs, and we were not getting the return that we needed. And so I approached Lisa and said, hey, we're not hitting our numbers. How can you help us? And she said, it's not a matter of how we can help you. It's where you will most value our assistance. Because RFP success can help throughout the process. And so what we did was we actually started with a very basic set of help from RFP success. And that made the ROI to spend the money on your team, Lisa, really easy for us to justify, because we started small and then you grew with us. Your role grew with us, and it worked out really well for us as a startup entity.
Yeah, and one of the things too is that we, and this is not meant to be a commercial for us by any means, but for those of you out there thinking, what do we do? One of the things that we do is we actually sometimes train ourselves out of a job, right? Like we work with somebody for a while, and part of our job is to teach you and train you how to do those things. So you don't need us as much anymore. We don't like that. We like for people to always be around, but it's not just we can come in and just do it for you. That's part of what we do. But most of the people hire us, and we really help bring them along and guide them and hold their hand along the way. So if we go back to talking about that, I want to talk some quantifiable numbers. What was your win rate kind of in the early days of your business versus what it is now?
So we were really proud of our win rate. From our understanding, our win rate of 20 to 25% was much higher than the industry standard. We were thinking we were doing great. The problem was that we were bidding on about a dozen RFPs a year. So that's one a month. And if you're only winning a handful of those, literally 2 or 3 of those over the course of the year, think about all that time and effort that we were taking away from doing our work. So the metrics made no sense for us to continue with what was really a poor ROI.
And that was a small team. I mean, that's not back when you had 30 some people on your team. That was when you had 4, 5, 6 people bidding on one a month. That's a lot, right?
Yeah. So, the load falls on a small, cadre of individuals disproportionately. It always does.
Always. You and I have had many late night Zoom meetings pounding out RFP responses at 2:00 in the morning. So totally get that. What's your win rate now?
So within 6 months of working with RFP Success and embracing the process, being much more client focused, being much more organized, being much more definitive about our win themes and how they went throughout the process, within 6 months, we were up to 50%. It took us 12 months to fully embrace the writing from the client's perspective. And we still struggle with it today. The RFP process is a constant evolution and education process. You have individuals that you're bringing into the process so that you expand your base. And so we still have training available to our staff members to talk about how to write from the client's perspective. But within 12 months, we were up to about 80 to 85%. And we did it by responding to fewer RFPs, and we were able to write better RFP responses because of that. And so we had a much higher win rate. It was honestly a bit scary to say no. I know a lot of people who listen to your podcast are entrepreneurs and they're go-getters, and it's hard to develop the skill to say no to a response. But if you are structured and rigorous in your criteria as to what you will bid on and what you won't, you can build your business much more successfully and quickly, and frankly, much less burden on your staff.
Right. So then that was my follow-up question, is really, how has this all affected your staff at the end of the day? They've got to be happy.
So, look, I will tell you, I said earlier, the RFP response process, the writing always falls disproportionately, just a handful of your staff that are the best at writing. Okay. And what those people were doing, you're thinking, we're writing one response a month, and a response takes 2 to 3 weeks for 3 to 5 people. That means half of my staff were spending half of their time writing RFPs in addition to their day job. We were burning people out between trying to win business and trying to keep our remaining business. And what people were able to do was to slow down, step back, be more thoughtful and purposeful in the RFP response that they were writing. It was a mindful response. It was a well thought out response. And so it made our staff so much more efficient, more effective, and happier by bidding on fewer, and everybody likes to win more.
Everybody likes to win more. And there is nothing worse. Well, there's probably some worse things, but it's a bad thing when you keep losing. You might see, like, okay, the first loss comes in, and the team's like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. But, 2 or 3 losses later, it starts to affect the team a little bit, and they start to get, that adds to that burnout. And, oh, by the way, something that you said, and most of our listeners are not dedicated full-time proposal people. You have a full-time job that doesn't include responding to RFPs. So you still have to your point, make the client happy, deliver, and that's going to take a hit. And it's a domino effect. I had a guy say to me once, I don't really believe in the percentages, the win percentage. I think it's a bunch of bull honky. And I was like, why do you say that? And he said, well, because all you have to do is just bid on the things you should bid on. And I'm like, ding, 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 you win, gold star. But he couldn't wrap his brain around that, because to your point, small businesses, entrepreneurs, you're scrappy. You want to go, like, we got to get business. We've got to get business. So I love seeing that you all have turned that corner. You turned it a while ago, and it just has made your life easier. But I know it was scary in that moment of like, oh, we got to let go of some of this.
I remember the moment that we made the decision to work with RFP Success. We literally had 2 RFP responses going simultaneously. We submitted those documents. One, we were not the incumbent, new contract. We submitted it. We won. We submitted almost an identical response. We were not the incumbent, and we did not win, and we did horrible on the scoring. And I remember the conversation with Lisa, and I said, Lisa, come on. We had almost 100s on this RFP response, and we won. We had 50s, 60s, and 70s in our scoring on this one. And you looked at me and you said, hold on a second. You submitted almost the identical response to 2 different RFPs? And I said, yeah, it was brilliant. It was so efficient. One was customized to the client. One was not. Which one won?
Yeah. That's
the
great.
Customized one.
Customized one. Oh my gosh. So this is such great information, and we've got more. What we're going to do is we're going to bring Steve back for a second version or a second episode here, because there's such great stuff to still talk about. So we're going to close out this episode. We are going to be back in 2 weeks with Steve's part 2. So please stay tuned. You've been listening to the RFP Success Show, and I am Lisa Rehurick, your host.
This has been another episode of the RFP Success Show with Lisa Rehurick, 8-time author, speaker, and CEO of the RFP Success Company. Thank you for joining us. If you have feedback on today's episode, email us at podcast@rfpsuccess.com. No matter your business size, industry, if you have an in-house RFP team, or need outside support, the RFP Success Company helps increase RFP win ratios by 10, 20, and even 50%. Learn more at the rfpsuccesscompany.com.